Greetings, everybody, and welcome to Planning Before Pixels. My name is Jeremy Osborne. I'm the Academic Director of Aquin Gymnasium, which you can find at thegymnasium.com. And what do? Well, we offer free online courses on topics such as web design, front-end development, user experience, content strategy, and much, much more. So this webinar is the latest in our series of discussions with notable figures in the industry. And today I'm joined by Heather O'Neill and Jen Kramer, who I will formally introduce in just a moment. But first, let's talk a little bit about the structure of this event. So I'll be chatting with Heather and Jen for about 40 to 45 minutes, and then we'll leave around 15 minutes at the end to take questions from the audience. Now, we do have Aquin Gymnasium's own Keir Cullen Janey in the background, and she's available for technical support if you need it. If you look in your GoToWebinar control panel, there is a questions tab, and you can feel free to add questions in there at any point. Again, just be aware that we're not going to answer those until the very end, unless it's a technical support issue. One other important twist. So we're going to be giving away a free copy of Jen and Heather's new book, Before You Code, at the very end of the webinar. And so we're going to do that based on what we feel is the best question during that Q&A session at the end. So start thinking about that and you can get a free book. Also, some of you have sent questions when you registered, and I'll be sprinkling those in throughout the conversation, and we'll spend some time on those as well. So on to our guests. So we have Jen Kramer, who has been teaching and performing web design for nearly 20 years. She's currently a lecturer at Harvard University Extension School in the Master of Liberal Arts and Digital Media Design program. She's created over 35 training courses for lynda.com, Front-End Masters, OS Training, O'Reilly Media, and Aquin Gymnasium, where she has a great course on creating HTML forms. Good afternoon, Jen. How you doing?
I'm great. How are you, Jeremy?
Excellent. Thank you. And then we have Heather O'Neill, who is a product strategist and business consultant with over a decade of experience. At Pixels for Humans, Heather helps startups grow into community-focused businesses that center people over profits. A problem solver at heart, she works with design teams to define problems, hypothesize solutions, and track success, which is something we're going to be talking about. So welcome, Heather. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Jeremy?
I'm doing very well, thanks.
Excellent.
So, so this is going to be kind of a free-flowing conversation, but we do want to talk a little bit about some of the content of your book. But one of the things I kind of wanted to start with, and maybe we'll start with Jen, is, you've done a lot of courses, you've taught a lot of students who are learning web design and development. And I guess my question is, why is there this rush towards the coding part? What is the rationale? Why does that happen, in your opinion?
Because it's the fun part?
Good answer, yeah.
As somebody who absolutely loves writing HTML and CSS, I mean, I totally understand it. But it's the same kind of thing that we did with research papers. We always want to figure out exactly what font we want to pick in Microsoft Word before we ever get started. When you talk to clients about all the old print materials, they want to talk about colors and logos and layouts, and no one actually wants to talk about the content or why they're doing something in the first place. So it's far more important to have those sorts of conversations because that is going to establish the whole arc of your development process. And as we all know, coding is expensive. Spend a period of time before you get started is truly cost effective. You actually come away with a plan, you know exactly what you're going to do, and better yet, you know why you're going to do it, and everybody's on the same page. So your web development team understands why they're doing what they're doing, the management understands it, there's no unhappy surprises at the end. So it's a really important step, and it's something that can really separate a particular web design team from another. You know, it's not just, I want a website and I want it blue, how much will that cost? With a few additional questions and a more extended conversation, you can actually sell yourself as a more knowledgeable and professional consultant, somebody who asks some more of these questions.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I wonder, I mean, so I think that, like, for students, like someone who's learning web design and development, they kind of have an excuse for like wanting to get into the code and so forth. But like Heather, do you think that there's a, from your perspective with working with like clients and businesses, is there another reason? Like what else do you think?
Well, I think that it can feel like you're making progress, and when you're planning, it feels sort of like you're standing still because you can plan sort of indefinitely. And when you get into the code, it feels like, oh, I'm actually building something, and it feels really powerful, like it's addictive. And so it's really exciting to get into code because suddenly the ideas in your head are real things that you can see, you can interact with. It exists in real life, and that's really powerful. And so going right to code feels like the right next step because having something tangible makes it more tangible for you. But like Jen was saying, if you spend the time to plan, not only can you know where you're going, what you're doing, and why, you can also know what to say no to. Because a lot of times it's really easy to get distracted by the next shiny thing that comes along. And instead of doing that, being able to say no and to focus fully on the thing that you're intending to do, to see it through to completion, can save you time, can save you money, and can ensure that you have really good success in the market.
And yeah, that's great. I mean, I love that idea of, I think you're right. Like coding does feel powerful. You're building something, right? There's progress. You can track it. You can measure it. But I guess also, so what are some of the dangers, right? What happens if you do go to code too quickly? I assume this is some of the reason that you've written this. Like, what happens? Anyone, Jen?
Yeah. I had a web consultancy firm for many years, and I can't tell you how many phone calls we got from people who are like, I just need 6 more things done on my website and we'll be ready to launch. We've already done $10,000 worth of work on this thing, and all we need is just these couple more things. Please just go ahead and click those buttons and make that magic happen, and we'll launch. And I ask a few questions, and then lo and behold, we discover that the whole website is completely wrong. We need to rethink everything again.
Right.
And the problem that they were actually trying to solve was not even addressed by the technology. One of my favorite all-time stories, though, is this. I had a client, and we all have clients like this. I love her dearly. But it is absolutely impossible to get any content out of a client, right? They just hate writing. And so, but she had a website and she was trying to stay up with things, to her credit. And so one day, this was probably like 15 years ago now. A lot of my best stories seem to come from this early period of the internet. Anyway, she calls me up and she says, Jen, I just got back from a search engine optimization seminar. There's this new thing called a blog. I need one. Will you please put it on my website? And really, I said, oh, really? Tell me more about this blog, knowing that, I can't get any content out of her. This is totally the wrong way to go. I'm just interested in hearing her define what she thinks a blog is. And she says, I have no idea what it is, but it improves my search engine optimization. So click some buttons and put it on the website. So after I got through explaining her the blog meant she had to write content, she had to write it regularly, and that's how the magic worked, her response was, well, I don't have time for that. Never mind. See you later. Right. So it's important to understand why we put the functionality in that we do. There are plenty of people who would simply say, sure, I'll put that in for you. Click, click, click. Here's your invoice. But it makes me more valuable as a consultant, even though I might not have gotten any money out of her that day, just having this 15-minute conversation. I added to my credibility as a web developer, and maybe she'd refer me to somebody later, get more work in that way. So that sense of honesty and making sure you have the right technology to solve the right problem is really, really important in running your consultancy.
Yeah, that's a great point too. And especially, I think over time, things have changed. And so I'm wondering, and maybe Heather, you have some insight too, on are people more willing in the year 2018 or 19 almost to accept this idea of planning? Like, is this, again, 10, 15 years ago, it was harder perhaps to educate clients and educate folks in the industry. Is it getting any easier? Is it changing? What do you like? How difficult is it to convince people like, no, you need to spend a lot of time doing this before we start coding?
It really depends on the person, but I think In some organizations, like when you come with organizations that really adopted sort of a more UX mentality or have really prioritized their customers or research, you get some of that sort of understanding and acceptance of the fact that, yes, planning is a part of the process, research is a part of the process, validation before we launch is part of the process. But overall, I'd say not really. To this day, I have clients who I work with where it's a constant struggle between, we'll deliver the thing that you say that you want, but we should really find out if this is the thing that we want. And I've had clients where we've done work with them and we've said, okay, fine, you won't let us talk to anyone, you won't let us validate if this is the right thing. We'll do the work because that's what we've agreed to do. And then the app or the product, whatever it is, completely flops and they're left bewildered. And sometimes we do a retrospective, sometimes they never call us again, but even as we're doing everything we can to try and figure out and convince them that yes, we should plan this out, it feels like to a lot of people like they're throwing money away or they can't see it. One of the people that I love in UX, Whitney Hess, she said once that, clients are paying you for and people are paying you for the very last thing that you give them. And everything up to that point, they're just trusting that you're doing the right process to get to that thing that they want from you at the end. And so if I could just turn around fully fledged products to all my clients in 3 weeks with no other needs from them or talking to anybody and they always worked, like my clients would be really happy with that. Right. But they have to sort of trust that when I say, yes, we need to spend some time validating this and testing it, that is the right way to go to get to the end result that they want, because they just don't know.
Yeah, and I've seen, I think one change I've noticed, that's an excellent point. I think one thing I've noticed is, there has been this trend and discussion over MVP. Right. So for the folks in the audience, this is minimum viable product. Right. So the basic idea, if you're not familiar with it, is essentially creating something quick and easy and getting it out there. But isn't that kind of a conflict with planning? Like, how does that whole concept now of like, yes, we need to get this out in the universe and get paying customers and all that. How does that fit into this whole process?
Yeah. Is it Facebook who talks about move fast and break things? Yeah, move fast and break the bank. I mean, honestly, if you don't start with a solid planning process, you are setting yourself up for, okay, we're just going to code this thing and we'll throw it on out there. And often these apps are released to crickets, right? Yeah. Nobody knows about the thing. Nobody needs the thing. The problem you thought you were solving it for yourself. It worked for you. You thought that was awesome. But the people you were actually trying to serve maybe didn't even know this was a problem or didn't really even think about this as a way to deal with that particular problem. Heather talks about how many flashlights apps did you say there were in the App Store?
There's the last time I checked, which was several months ago, there was 1,877 flashlight apps. Yeah. And to Jen's point, I think it's also the case that you can launch something that's good, but if your MVP goes out there and no one knows you exist, it doesn't matter how good it is. And part of your planning is figuring out how to get people aware of and interested in your product, right? And so even when you're creating an MVP, you can't just go from idea to MVP without some planning. Or who knows what you're even making, especially if you're not the one coding it yourself. You have to at least plan enough to translate your vision to someone else who's going to build it. And then it's also worth thinking about, well, if we build this, how are we going to use this to actually get some validation? Because an MVP does you no good if no one ever downloads it or uses it, because then you don't get to know if it's worthwhile. And it may be worthwhile and you just didn't have the publicity you needed, or you didn't talk to the right audience, or any number of things that, again, if you had planned even your MVP, you could have gotten a lot farther.
Yeah, and so I think there's something kind of there's a lot of misconceptions about what an MVP is, and it can go in a lot of directions. I think it probably goes back to what you were mentioning earlier of just like this feeling like you're doing something, right? That you've got a team and you walk into a room and there's like, 10 people like banging away at computers and keyboards, and that must mean that they're doing something worthwhile, right?
Yeah. It's easy to confuse being busy with being productive and moving forward.
So one of the things that so to kind of shift the conversation to, okay, I think we've established like it's a good idea to plan, right? And in many ways, when I used to do a lot of teaching, I would talk about the fact that like the word design is actually kind of built in to the etymology of the word is connected to planning, right? Design and planning is actually kind of the same thing. But one of the things that you talk about in the book is, step one, like understanding the business. And we have to share this example that Jen showed last week, and it's also in the book, which has to do with a website. And there's actually two websites here that we can look at. So one is Gates and Fences, right?
Yep.
Lots of stuff.
That's Gates, letter N, Fences, all one word, .com, if you're following along at home.
Yeah. So
all free.
We have one site here, and then we have another site here. So lingscars.com. Now it's your contention, and this is, by the way, fantastic. I mean, there is a lot of stuff going on here, and I hope the webinar doesn't crash with all of the things that are going on the screen. So it's your contention, Jen, that kind of one of these sites is successful and the other one maybe less so. Yep. Can you talk about that a little bit, and what do you mean by that?
Sure. I would encourage the studio audience to please take a look at these on your phone, on your tablet, as you're looking at it here in the browser. So what you're going to see is Gates and Fences has absolutely no mobile compatibility whatsoever, whereas Lings Cars has a whole different website experience on your phone. So that's one of the obvious differences. But generally speaking, it's this. If you take a look at, we'll start with the successful one, and it's actually one of my favorite websites, which is lingscars.com. And I know a lot of you are looking at that going, okay, I was with you to this point, Jen, but you're crazy. That's a terrible website. Yes, it is true that there's a lot going on. She went back to the 90s. They want their website back. There's spinning, blinking stuff everywhere. She's got a really crazy sense of humor. But if you take a look, right, it's in fine print near the top of the web page. It'll actually tell you something like 85 million pounds she's made from that website in like the last year. And if you look her up on Newsweek, you'll find she's made millions and millions of pounds. She's in the UK. So then I usually ask my class at that point, is this now a successful website? Most people go, well, yes, if it's making money. But you never thought it was a successful website before that. So here's what she says about that particular website is she does not want to do business with boring people. Mm-hmm. She wants to have fun clients. And she actually filters for that. That's that crazy design that you see there. If you're turned off by that, if you don't trust her, having looked at that website, and she says right on the bottom, you can trust me, I'm Ling. Okay, she's even got good stuff for you geeks. If you're a geek, make sure you view the source of the web page. You won't be disappointed. Mm-hmm. She really wants to scale out the people who are boring. There's lots of places to go and rent a car if you're a boring person. But people who are fun and interesting, she wants to talk to you. And so she believes that a website should reflect the personality of the owner. And she is very wedded to this philosophy of if you don't like her site, she doesn't want to do business with you. So I really admire that about her, that she has a really good sense of screening for her perfect target audience. The flip side of that is Gates and Fences. If you take a look at Gates and Fences, that looks kind of like a front page kind of thing that's been hanging around about 20 years too long. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have any sort of mobile orientation to it. It's got way too many words on it. It's got brand names that I don't think are going to mean much to a lot of people unless maybe you're a gate specialist. I'm sure there are a few of you out there, but the average homeowner who might be looking for Gates and Fences is probably not going to know brand names of gates and fences. Anyway, that's my supposition. it's very difficult to read. It's difficult to navigate, and to me, it doesn't inspire any trust at all. They want you to buy gates and fences online. I tried looking at it last night. I could buy I forget, I think a gate for like $3,500, and I could get it next day shipped for $3,500, which was kind of cool. Have a gate showing up at my house.
Yeah, sure.
But I'm not sure I really want to give them my credit card number. So messy design, but at the same time, it doesn't work. It doesn't work in that context. It's not done with deliberateness, and it's not trying to target the right people.
So going back to that idea of, again, so if like the core concept is, trying to understand your business, understand the role of your website. Heather, what kind of process, what kind of questions, what sort of things could you use with a client to start to kind of tease out those ideas? Like what are really, how do you get to that understanding as quick as possible?
Oh gosh, it varies client to client. I mean, I do have actually a client kickoff checklist where I have a list of questions, and I go through that and I figure out which are the ones that I need to ask my clients. Mm-hmm. One question that I always ask, and that no matter whether you work with clients as a consultant or if you are in an in-house position of some kind and doing any sort of build work on a product, one thing that I always ask that always blows minds is, how will we know if this project is successful? Mm-hmm. And that's so powerful, because most of the time we're just building things to build things because somebody's mother's, uncle's, whatever's thought that it would be really cool to have this feature. The CFO dreamt it up one night and now it is law. Whatever the well-intentioned or not origins of the project that you happen to be working on, if you don't know what it's trying to do and how it's going to succeed, you're never going to be able to tell if you've done the right thing. And a lot of times that's why products flop, is because nobody's ever sat down and said, well, what is success and how do we focus our tasks on ensuring success for this thing we are doing? Mm-hmm. And so that would be my number one thing, that if you don't have anything else you take away from this webinar, please take that question. It's powerful. And it never fails to get me. That's a really good question. So,
yeah, and it also, I think you're right about the measure of success, and sometimes it does feel like you're guessing, and you have to put something out there, and it does depend from project to project. I also kind of think of, I want to return for a second to that idea of, that the rushing to the fun stuff, right? The rushing to the design and creativity. So where does that come in? At what point do you feel like, we can unleash the hounds and the designers and, can start to go crazy, and what does that look like? I mean, I know we talk a lot, and we have a lot of courses on Gymnasium that talk about prototyping, right? And I know that you've mentioned things like wireframing in your book and so forth. And so I'm wondering if you could kind of talk about that process a little bit, so the wireframing, prototyping, kind of the getting closer to, quote, the fun stuff. Or is wireframing fun? I don't know. You tell me.
I mean, I think wireframing would definitely be fun.
Yeah.
Honestly, it depends on where you are when you start. But I think that the way to know that you are ready to think about actually building this for real is if you've talked to people who are going to use it, and they've either agreed to give you money or they've given you feedback if they're already giving you money on how they might use it. And you've done some sort of testing to make sure that, yes, this is something that makes sense to people, and also some research to make sure that not only does it make sense when someone's using it, but does it make sense in the context of their lives so that they actually will use it. Because you can build a usable feature that nobody uses because the feature didn't matter in the first place. Again, coming back to that MVP that nobody wanted, it can be super usable. It can be really great. It can be beautifully designed. But if no one wanted it, it doesn't matter how usable it was. So you have to also look at the context of, will they actually use this? And you can do some validation around that and some research as well.
Yeah, Jen, anything to add to that? So when you're working with folks or consulting, and at what point do you feel like that the prototyping, the design stuff? When does that kick in, and what are the steps along the way? When do you feel comfortable doing that?
Yeah, so I like to understand, of course, the goals of the project, and there's three kinds of goals. There's the actual organizational goals, there's website goals, and there's user goals, which we talk about in the book. I like to know about personas. Who is it exactly that we're building for, and why? I like to have a sense of the kind of information we're going to include on the website. If we can actually get the content itself, that's super helpful, because we know exactly how long it is and so forth, rather than letting our template choice in WordPress drive the content for the website. Let's actually write the content first and then find a template to hold it all. That's kind of a fun way of doing things.
Yeah.
Yeah, Heather, you were going to say?
No, go ahead. I'm good. Just nodding my head.
A sense of how people are doing, moving through their lives, and how this particular website or application is going to integrate into that flow. It's called a user journey. That kind of thing is helpful to know. So basically, and of course branding, the logos and colors and all that stuff. So once you have that kind of stuff in hand, you're finally ready to put it together into an application or a website where hopefully people are at a point where they can look at it and go, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. This is the right information architecture. It's the right target audience. It's addressing the questions that we sent out to build. None of that discussion you can have. You can't really evaluate any kind of wireframe or high fidelity or low fidelity mock-up until you actually know the questions to those answers first. So you have a stick to measure against.
Right, and I guess that relates to the branding and the logo piece, right? Which is, again, having fun with like the color scheme and I guess you could call it like the personality of the site. Again, that feels like the fun stuff, but
it's actually separate from the site, at least initially. You can have a logo, you can pick out a few colors, you can pick out some fonts. Maybe they've been used in your print materials if you have print materials, but you can do all of that independent of the layout of the website itself.
And I wonder if is there a different structure? I mean, a lot of what we've been talking about feels like, it applies very well to if you're creating something from scratch. Is there some sort of methodology for doing things like redesigns or for refreshing a site or working on a site where, I'm thinking of, larger sites where sometimes there might be, 200, 300, 1,000 pages on the website. Like, is there some sort of like, how does that work? Where there's a lot of code already, right? But you really, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, the first step would be to audit what is on this site and what is actually important. And that is, a tedious process and a little bit time consuming, but trying to create a website, even a redesign that doesn't take into account the content and the code that currently exists can ruin different sites. The other thing to think about is it worth trying to reuse things that are there versus trying to just create something new and take what we need and sort of leave the rest, right? And so I think there's a balance that needs to be struck there. And so it really starts with that conversation, again, of what Jen was saying, what's the goals? And I think Jen and I have it's the same thing asked differently. Jen thinks about it in terms of goals, and I think about it in terms of success. But it's really identifying the same thing is, what are we actually trying to do with this? And how do we know at the end that we've done that? And so I think that with a redesign or with a new feature of an existing product, or even with just a refresh of an existing product, it's the same idea of, why are we refreshing this? I have a potential client I've been talking to, and they want to refresh their app design, like the visual design, because customers have said that it feels outdated, and they're starting to get a lot of complaints, particularly on sales calls. And then they also said, oh, but maybe we could reorganize some things and find a new way to do this. And so it's figuring out which of those is the bigger priority, and how do we balance what people already know with the updates that we might be making.
Yeah, you mentioned in a previous presentation that I attended, you were talking about some of the valuable nuggets of gold that you might get from like a customer service, right? So like the customer service is like the front line of complaints, questions, and yet how often are we accessing their knowledge and expertise to like fold into a process?
Yeah.
And you're saying, not as much as it should be.
That's very true. And that's actually one of the things that any client that I'm coming to, I always say immediately, like, can we talk to your customer service? And are you tracking what kind of questions they're getting? Actually, I'm working with one of my clients right now to help them. They do everything manually over email individually. And so how do we streamline that to make it better for the customers getting the feedback, and then also make it more actionable for us as we're building updates to the product, because we want to be taking smart action. Go ahead, Jem.
And let me also get clear too about what we mean by metrics for success. How do you measure whether this is a successful project? So my students usually come back with, well, I installed Google Analytics, done. But it's bigger than that, right? It's not just site traffic increase. I have a great story about this too. Back in the day when Paris Hilton was really big, she had a boyfriend. His name was Rick Solomon, and they made a unsavory video. And I had a client at the time who was an accountant whose name was Rick Solomon. And if you close your eyes and imagine Rick Solomon, the accountant. That's how he looked. Okay. So there was this. I was looking. There was no Google Analytics at the time. It was a different thing. But I watched the traffic, which was going along, and then all of a sudden, like, the traffic went off the charts. And I realized that what had happened was people were Googling for Rick Solomon and finding my client, and unsurprisingly, they hit the homepage and then bounced off again. But if they were looking for, if we were just measuring like the amount of traffic coming to the site, it looked like we were wildly successful. But of course, all those people were looking for something else.
Yes.
So you need to get more specific about your metrics than just let's have lots of traffic. We want that traffic to convert to whatever it is, sign up for email lists or purchase something or call customer support. Or sometimes you want to do something that's actually offline. I want to reduce the number of phone calls asking us about the store hours, by 10%, let's say. So it doesn't even necessarily have to do with something happening on the website. We could actually track that in customer service. Did the call volume go down? So establishing those things up front can be really important to the design of the site as well. If you're trying to reduce the call or the number of calls for the hours, maybe we need to rearrange the page to make those hours easier to find.
Right.
Yeah.
Shifting gears here again, one of the questions, one of the things we haven't really addressed, and this came up in some of the registration questions, was kind of acknowledging the size of a team you're working on, and specifically, a lot of folks, I think, who work in smaller teams. So maybe you're just a solo UX consultant, or you're just one person, and you have to kind of rely on this system. Versus being part of like a 9 or 10 member team where everyone can really get on the same page. And I suspect that there are challenges on both sides. So I suspect that, if you're a solo practitioner, it can be very hard to have to educate the client and the other people in the system. And I suspect if you're in a large team, it can also lead to, confusion, communication issues, personal dynamics, not agreeing and so forth. But so I guess I'm wondering, do you have kind of different strategies depending on the size of your team, or what are some of the tips and advice you can help, maybe just starting with like the solo practitioner?
I think for very small groups or solo practitioners, it's really about making sure that you have the minimum information to be able to make a decision and take action, along with a process that allows you to revisit assumptions. And so on any team, there's no finite amount of research that you can do that will guarantee that you've 100% got everything correct, no matter how hard you try. And so there's always the you launch and cross your fingers aspect to a certain extent, but planning mitigates that a lot. When you're just one person, you cannot spend all the time doing as much research and as much planning because you don't have as much time available to you. And so it's finding that right balance of minimum planning to move forward now with a process that allows me to revisit decisions I've made later to validate that they were the right ones, or to update them to new ones. And so it's making sure that as a solo practitioner, you have a really iterative process and you have set up with either your clients or the people on your team if you're in a company that we'll need to revisit this later. And when we do, we'll be able to possibly make some updates, and that should be a part of how we work. And I think this is where the aspects of like the lean startup and lean UX really become helpful, because those are meant to be, well, lean. And so they work really well for small or solo teams. And so I'd say start there with building out how you do things. Those work great for larger groups as well, but definitely on the small side.
Yeah, Jen, anything to add to that? Does that resonate?
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. So then I guess on the flip side too, where do things like, so now let's move kind of up the spectrum a little bit to a larger group, maybe between 5 or 10 or more, and all of a sudden you're kind of adding infrastructure, and you have people like a project manager, right, whose job is to kind of march the team along a set of expectations and deliverables and so forth. So to me, that feels, that I know that that can sometimes create additional conflicts and dilemmas, right? Where all of a sudden you're like, well, no, this planning phase, there's, there needs to be leeway here, right? And then, then you can even add this layer of agile, and what does that all mean? So again, so for larger teams, what are the challenges there? And what, and are there some tips, shortcuts, any sort of advice you can give to those folks who have to kind of deal with that?
Anything that, go ahead. Okay. Anything that you can get sort of top-down buy-in is really powerful in larger teams, because in larger teams, it's usually a signal of being a part of a larger organization, right? You don't see 10-person design and development teams with an otherwise 12-person company. And when you have a larger organization, if the people in leadership, even if it's only just your direct leadership, are not vested in the full process and they only want to see the results or see things churned out quickly, you're never going to be able to do the things you need to be really, really successful. And, they might be okay with that. I would disagree, but it certainly happens. I mean, you can think about Google+, which we all found out recently was closed, and we all said, wait, that was still around. And the reason is that it was around for so long is because Google has the resources to keep sort of banging on it to see if it can work. And Google has a much smarter process than a lot of other companies. And if Google was a startup trying to launch Google+, we would not have heard of them past 2012. But they had the resources to go to 2018 before they finally called it quits. And they have a really good process. And so if you're looking at your own company, you can say, well, are my stakeholders bought into the process of planning and researching and validating and testing, or do they just want to see things launch quickly? And that's really where you start with a big team, is getting that buy-in from the top, getting people excited at the top, because when it comes from the top, then suddenly your job is dependent on it. Then suddenly you have to care about it because your boss cares about it, because it can make a difference in whether you get a raise or whether you keep your job or whether you get to move into that cool new team to do that cool new thing. But with that, you get an advocate too. And you get someone who helps you sort of break down silos, because one of the biggest challenges when you are in a larger organization and you have large teams is everybody gets one job and we all become sort of a conveyor belt of throw it over the wall, this next person's going to do that next part, and there's not a lot of communication. And so when you're looking at your team and how you work together, what's that process look like? Do you get the developers involved in the testing so they understand the changes that are being made? Do you talk to customer service and get their feedback on, the different things that you're trying based on the feedback they've heard? Have you talked to marketing about how they're promoting this new feature that you're building so that you can know what they're promising to customers and if you're actually building that? Mm-hmm. A lot of times the answers to these is no, we haven't. And really the biggest challenge is maybe we should, and maybe we should work together to figure this out. And it's hard to coordinate that dance. And that's when having an advocate from the top really helps, because then you can sort of, you can make it happen more easily, and you have sort of permission to make it happen, because people worry about their jobs. And so they drop off from doing the right thing to do the thing that keeps them their job, or that they perceive to keep them.
I think we've had similar conversations with previous guests, and one of the terms that has come up a few times is finding like the champion, right? So finding someone who can champion your project and your work, and I think that's an excellent point. So people watching, keep that in mind. Find your champion, find your advocate. It does go a long way. So I want to pay attention just to the timing. We've got about maybe one more topic, and then we're going to switch over to the question and answer stuff. So I'm going to kind of jump towards the end here, and towards the end of the book, you're talking about these two concepts of measuring your impact and analyzing your results. So what does that mean? How what does measuring and analyzing look like in your dynamic?
Heather is the queen of measurement.
Okay. Jen, why don't you go, though, because I feel like I've been talking a lot, so I'd love to hear from you.
Nope, go ahead.
You don't want to explain KJ?
Nope, you go ahead and explain KJ. That's fine.
All right. So once you've sort of set a definition for success, or you've set some goals for the product, for your business, and for your users, measuring is really finding out, did we do it, right? Mm-hmm. Is the thing we set out to do the thing that's being done? Did we achieve what we were hoping to achieve? And most of the time, you got close, but you didn't get there. And so it's also a chance for you to say, well, what worked and what didn't? And how can we use this to keep moving forward? And something that Jen mentioned earlier about the numbers and about you can have a lot of traffic and not be doing very well is when you're measuring different things and you're using a lot of quantitative data, it's really easy to make hasty decisions based on that data, or to make, I think I know what that means decisions. It's really easy to look at numbers and interpret what it means, but numbers are just numbers. If you have an email list and you have an open rate of 10%, that could be really good because normally you have an open rate of 3%, or it could be really awful because normally you have an open rate of 30%. Mm-hmm. And so 10% by itself doesn't actually tell you anything useful until you put it in context. And thinking about measuring your results, you have to put those numbers into context. You have to take the quantitative data you got and look at the qualitative, well, why is this number coming up and what does that mean? You can't just make a gut decision. Jen's example really clearly articulated it. If your name right now is, I don't know, who's someone famous, Netflix, I don't know, maybe but, if you were Paris Hilton, but not the Paris Hilton, and you had a website, you would get really high numbers of people coming, but then also people leaving.
Right.
And so that inflated information is what you need to consider. The other thing when we're talking about analyzing results is you spend a lot of time when you're planning doing research, right? So you look at, what are my competitors doing? What do customers say they want? How do customers solve this problem now? How do people use the product? And can they use the new designs I've created? And a really important step to taking action on that is understanding, again, what does that mean? And if we've only talked to 7 people, what decisions should we make about what to move forward? And Jen, I'm actually going to pass it to you to explain KJ.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Very kind.
So after you've done some user testing, after you've done some analysis, then what we were recommending to do to analyze this very qualitative data that you have. It's a series of observations. How do you actually make this qualitative? So what we do is we recommend running a meeting using what's called the KJ method. And what's his name again? I'm very sorry. He's a Japanese man who invented it.
Oh gosh, sorry.
Which we're both going to blank on. Apologies, everyone.
That guy.
I'll look it up while you're talking.
Okay, and so what they determined actually from studies of military commanders, believe it or not, is that when you put a lot of people in the room with a lot of expertise, that you could actually come up with the same answers time and time again. Whereas if you take the experts and you look at their answers to certain questions individually, they're almost always wrong. They're just wrong. So by putting people together, you tend to come up with the right answers. And so what the KJ method does is it capitalizes on this. You take all of your observations, you're going to write them on sticky notes, you're going to put them up on a board, and you're going to do all this without talking. That's the best part. Because we all know that guy. The guy who wants to monopolize the whole conversation and determine, like, the thing that we learned was this thing, and we don't need to have any more of a meeting because I'm totally right. This will neutralize that particular person, and it will also make the person who never says anything in the meeting actually speak up. So what you'll do is you'll wind up putting up all these observations on sticky notes, you put them up on the board, you group things that are in common, and then you label those groups, and then you vote as to which group is the most important set of these observations and what we should probably work on fixing first. Now, ideally, that's exactly how you go about doing it. Realistically, sometimes budget plays into it. It may be that the most obvious thing to fix is the thing that costs, $1 million to fix. But the second most obvious thing to fix, that's like 2 hours of the designer's time and we're done. So you may actually have a little bit of real world in there tempering some of those answers, but it can really drive exactly what is the next thing that we need to fix on our website. And so Steve Krug, among many others, who's a very well-known name in usability, recommends that basically once a month you just have some people come in, have them test your website or test your application, measure how they do, run this kind of analysis, and that will drive what you're going to do for your next sprint, basically speaking. And then you can come in and run the cycle again.
That consistency, I think, is probably the thing. If I were to pinpoint something that probably we're all a little bit guilty of, is like that consistency of like returning to the site and getting that feedback. One, because it's like, you feel like you're comfortable, right? And you've hit a certain spot. But the truth is you're getting new people, you're getting new visitors, and you're getting new new goals and so forth.
And new mental models, new ways of thinking about that problem, new expectations that people have, depending on what's happening in the industry.
Right, which is why gates and fences needs a refresh. So we're going to move to questions here.
Sure. While you look up just the KJ method was created in the 1960s by a Japanese anthropologist whose name was Jiro Kawakita.
Got it. Excellent. That's like a good trivia question for something. So we're going to go to this question by Mary Beth, and Mary Beth says, "Hi, I'm a UX designer at a new company, not independent, and I've been on projects to design 10 to 12 page sites. Recently, clients just identify the topics they want to cover, and that's it. How do you best handle asking the right questions to very limited availability clients where requirements essentially don't exist?" So I think this is kind of a fair question, right? So if I'm going to kind of restate my take on it, it's like, you're working with people who are hard to get feedback from.
Yep.
What do you do?
Jen, would you like to go?
Sure. Well, usually I try to get them in a room for 15 minutes or on the phone call. Yeah. And try to get them to explain, please tell me what your business is. Okay, and who is doing business with you? So I can try to understand the users. Do you have a website? Because I'm not an app person. I'm always dealing with websites. So do you have a website right now? What does that website look like? How is it working for you? What do you think you need to change? What do you think you need to keep? It's actually a more interesting question to ask people, what should you keep about your current website? They're always willing to trash their current website and talk about all the things that are wrong, but they have to think really hard about what's right with their website. So
there are always things that are right, so it's a great question. Sorry.
Yes, so true. So I usually start the conversation there. I usually try to talk to them a little bit about content. Usually there's too much content, badly written content, way too many words. A lot of it's outdated, a lot of it's trivial, some of it's redundant. So there's lots of things to talk about with them. Once you actually understand their business, it may jog things in your head of other clients you've worked with or other websites that you admire, even if the website that you're thinking of has nothing to do with their business. So you said a 10 to 12 page website. CNN's website does this thing that I think is really useful that may actually be useful on your 10 to 12 page website. Here's what it looks like. Here's how it works. And this is why I think it's useful. So those kinds of conversations are often good. And again, it's often clients who are calling you like that, especially on a 10 to 12 page website, they think of you as the button clicker. That's what you're there to do. You're there to click the little buttons and make the magic happen because I'm not good. I'm the business owner. I'm not good with computers. I don't have time for this. Do whatever it is you do and let me know when it's over. So you establish yourself as a much more of a partner in this process, and you can get more answers out of the client that way. And even if you do wind up establishing a lot of things on your own because they're busy and they've told you to just go and run with it, you'll at least be going in the right direction more than likely.
Okay.
Sorry, I just want to add a quick note. The other thing is when you have limited time is to ask what seem like really obvious questions in a way that puts the onus on you for not understanding. And it could put you a little bit down at first, but you'll create a better product. And then you can talk to both those clients. And it sounds like you're not in control of getting the clients. So you can talk to your supervisors or your boss about, hey, I asked these questions and I was able to get a better result for this client. So can we start asking this as part of the process? And so sort of playing that long game as well.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Let's shift to another question. This one is from Ben from Melbourne, who says, although planning ahead is a practical choice, starting with code can help to determine how feasible the solution is to be implemented. And it can also help to investigate what are the best tools and techniques required to achieve the project's goal. The question is, how production ready do you think prototype code should be to balance the code reusability and planning? So I think that's kind of an interesting question too. So code is so talk about your interpretation of the word code and where does it fit in? Can it fit in earlier in the project?
Absolutely. And I think that, no matter what, Ben, there's some planning, even if it's only in your mind. The other thing is, if you know how to code yourself and you have an idea and it's fastest for you to express that idea by coding it, absolutely do that. This is not a hard, fast, always rule that you must follow to the death or anything of that nature. It's fluid. The thing that we see happen a lot is that people get an idea and they hire someone and spend money to code it before they've even thought through all these other aspects. I think that there is a lot of value in coding something that's completely throwaway just to get a sense of what this would be like. But if you don't have the skills to do that yourself and you have to pay someone to do that, it's definitely worth doing some planning up front. To your actual question, which is how production ready do you think a prototype code should be to balance the code reusability and planning? I think that comes back to who you're working with and what their expectations are. If you are working with someone who is a startup founder or who had an idea and you're building code for them and they don't understand the coding process, you need to make sure your prototype code is pretty production ready, because that's what they'll expect, because they don't know the difference. Or you're going to spend a lot of time educating, and anyone they show it to is also going to need to be educated. If you're building it for yourself and a bunch of folks who understand how coding works and that you can just throw it all away and build it again once you've nailed it down, then go ahead and make it as throwaway as possible. But whenever you show something to the client, you have to be prepared, or to a boss or whomever, you have to be prepared for them to say, yes, I want that and we're keeping it. Because inevitably, if you show something to show, like as a contrast, or to show how bad it is or how quick it is to make throwaway code, they'll want to keep the thing that you were super ready to throw away.
Yeah, you want to avoid that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'm a fan of prototyping tools, and there are approximately 1 bajillion of these prototyping tools. Everything from something like Balsamiq up to Adobe XD being the latest hottest thing, or Sketch or whatever. But these kinds of tools, they almost feel like the real thing. That I can see a screen, I know exactly how it's going to look. I can click this button and it looks like something happens because it goes to your next mock-up. But so that's pretty kind of realistic. I may not be able to exactly type something in the search box, but it will go to a page with search results, and I can kind of make that connection that it's not perfectly coded yet, kind of thing. So if you use tools like that to actually do your prototyping, you don't have the issue of, yes, I wrote this pile of code that I'm now going to throw out, because that just sounds scary to so many people. You wrote all that, I paid for all that code, you got to keep it for this next round of even though it costs more money and it takes longer.
I think that actually kind of comes back to where we started at the beginning of the conversation, right? So that one of the dangers of coding too quickly is that people, especially higher ups, the folks with the purse strings, kind of feel like, oh, we've made this investment, and so we're not going to throw it out. And the truth is,
like the government.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other thing.
Well, I worked for the government, and once the project got funded, they would continue to fund it even if it was a bad idea. So we would get all these bids for extremely lowball. Like I worked in cost, and so just to get the funding. Yeah.
So I think that really ties into it. No matter what organization, you're like, hey, there's an attachment to this code that you feel very loath to toss away, and it's extremely dangerous, in my opinion. So
the flip side of that, Jeremy, by the way, is that the messier it looks when you try testing it, the more likely people are to give you feedback and feel like, oh, well, you just drew this on a piece of paper, so what's the big deal of erasing this and moving it over here? You'll actually get that feedback, other than if it's too pretty, believe it or not, they'll go, oh, I just spent a lot of money to put that button right there. I don't want to ask her how much it's going to cost to move it over there. So,
well, that's where you're going to have the 20-minute discussion on like the shade of blue. Right. Or all of a sudden it's like, I really hate cornflower blue. Can we change that? And you're like, no, that's not even the right question. So, so one last one here. So this is from Nikki, who says, I work for a charity that's celebrating 25 years next week. The website's been around for a long time and shows it. We know it's not user-friendly and we're not reaching our target audience, but no one in our team of 12 has coding experience and no money to hire a website developer. What can I do to get myself up to speed on redesigning the website so that the charity is able to get more referrals? Jen, I saw you raising your hand.
Yeah, this is Jen's question.
Yeah, this is my question. Okay. I'm really excited about a lot of the website builders that are out there now for these kinds of clients. And it's probably because when I started my career in 2000, we spent all kinds of money building these custom websites in Dreamweaver, and they took forever and they cost a lot of money. And now we have all these great tools that make responsive, fully functional, beautiful websites literally just clicking around without knowledge of HTML or CSS. And so Squarespace, Wix, are two of the ones that I know relatively well. I think Squarespace is probably, its templates tend to look more professional than some of the others, although people are Wix fans, people are Weebly fans. I like the Squarespace interface. These kinds of tools really open things up for clients, and they're a wonderful thing. The client pays for web hosting. It comes with all of the tech support that you need, so you can call them up. The help is actually helpful. It's Googleable. So you can type it into Google and you'll actually get an answer that actually makes sense to mere mortals, shall we say. Yeah, it's these tools are really great, and it makes maintaining those websites easy too. I've built Squarespace for a number of, like, I play with the Lowell Philharmonic Orchestra, and I built them a website in Squarespace, and I haven't touched it in a couple of years because the board maintains the whole website on their own. It makes me very, very happy. It frees me up to go do more interesting sort of work. And so I would encourage you to take a look at these tools. They all come with free trials. You can sign up. You can see what it feels like working with those tools. And of course, you can use the book to figure out exactly how you should be planning this website, how you should evaluate your current website, what do you need to keep, what do you need to get rid of, and then you can build something really interesting using Squarespace, Wix, Weebly, something else.
Cool. And the great thing about the book is it comes with an entire workbook that's a PDF, which has everything you need to actually take the stuff in the book and apply it to what you're working on.
So yeah, thank you for reminding us. What we're going to do behind the scenes, we're going to wrap this up, but we actually can share this checklist. And so behind the scenes, Keir Colin-Janey, who is on our Aquin Gymnasium account, is going to attempt to share this handout, which is a small PDF checklist that is made available for free. But also, let me kind of point to, and there it is down in the handout section. So attendees, you can go ahead and click on that PDF and feel free to use it.
Yeah,
I'm going to share my screen here again and just kind of remind folks that there's a couple places that you can kind of get the book. So there's beforeyoucode.guide, which will let you buy directly. And then you can also go to Amazon. And Amazon has the paperback as well as the ebook version. You do have to do some searching if you have a preference over paperback versus ebook, make sure you're getting the right version. Yeah. And we're also going to be giving away one of these books momentarily. So did I catch everything there? Is everything...
Yeah, so the important thing to know is that the website will soon have the link to the ebook directly. And if you buy directly from Amazon, you have to email me to get the workbook because there's no way for me to add it into the way Amazon's set up. Okay.
So we do have this decision to make. So we had, we got actually a lot of great questions, but limited time. So we had Nikki's question about charity. We had Ben's question about when to code. And then we had the first question from Mary Beth about... she's a UX designer and talking about limited availability clients. So I'm going to leave it to you guys. Who gets the book? Mary Beth? Ben?
How about we give it to the nonprofit?
The nonprofit?
Yeah, nonprofit with no money.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good, fair enough.
She said she's going to be learning it on her own time, which you didn't read, but I read in the actual chat window.
Okay, yeah. Excellent. So what you'll need to do in that case is probably the best way to connect with us is through Twitter. And so I'll just share that real quickly too. So I think that's going to be the best way to do it. So we're Aquin Gymnasium at Twitter, or that's our handle, is Aquin Gymnasium. I might be able to actually bring it up here. So any last words here from you two? I want to thank you for joining me. This has been really great content. Anything that you'd like to end up talking about?
I would just like to encourage everybody out there that the skills that we're talking about here in terms of matching business and user requirements and so forth with websites is a piece that separates you from the average run-of-the-mill coder. There are lots of people out there who can write code for a problem that's already been defined. If you are the kind of person who can run that conversation, gather those requirements, and translate them into websites and applications, that really does set you apart from all of the other people out there in the industry. It gives you a much wider picture of what's going on, and you can charge more. It's a beautiful thing.
And the other thing, sorry.
No, I couldn't agree more. So go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Heather.
Yeah, the other thing I would say is if you're not doing this now, have some grace for yourself to learn how to start planning and thinking about things. And you don't learn all this stuff overnight and it magically all comes together and works. It takes time to put together. It takes time to infiltrate your organization. It takes time to adjust how you work with clients to find a process and a cadence that work for you. And so whether or not you get the book, the things that you heard here today on the webinar, take them and apply them as makes sense to how you're working now. And then revisit it, and you'll find that in 6 months, something that we said that you were like, I don't care about that, becomes super relevant. And so there's a constant process of iterating, and nothing is hard and fast rules. So just keep pushing forward.
Excellent advice. Consistency, pushing forward, it never ends. So
Yeah.
Thank you so much, both of you. This was really a pleasure, and look
Thank
forward
you,
to
Jerry.
kind of welcome, and we look forward to kind of seeing what you do in the future.
Awesome.
And with that, we'll end it. And thank you, everyone, for attending. And we will be making this recording available for free. Check the Aquent Gymnasium Twitter account, and I believe we'll also be sending emails. Don't quote me on that, but I think we do that. At the very least, we'll be making the recording available, and you can watch it and share it to your friends and family. And with that, we will say goodbye. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone. Thank you.
Bye.